We come to questions to the Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Andrew George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 1.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is determined to halt and reverse the trend of nature loss in our country and end the cycle of destroy, regret and restore. We're investing £400 million for tree planting and peatland restoration. We've announced a new nature restoration fund and set out plans to end the use of neonicotinoid pesticides that harm our precious pollinators.
Andrew George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Minister for reply. The UK is one of the most nature-depleted nations on this planet, and the 2023 UK State of Nature report indicated that up to 1 in 6 UK species faces the risk of extinction. The Minister's reply is very encouraging, but just last week the Chancellor, promoting the government's growth agenda, urged us to, and I quote, stop worrying about bats and newts. I mean, if it really does come to that, who speaks for government? Whose side is the Minister on, the Chancellor or threatened wildlife?
Minister.
I think, Mr. Speaker, that we've got to end the false dichotomy between creating places for people and creating places for nature. The previous government did introduce biodiversity net gain that says when you build somewhere, you add on 10% for nature. That is in its early stages. It's had just a year, but we are looking to see how that might be extended. And we've also, with the Nature Restoration Fund, established a more efficient and effective way to allow obligations related to our most important sites and species to be discharged at scale, which has a greatest environmental benefit and a win-win for nature and for people.
Catherine Fookes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Minister for announcing our plan to ban bee-killing pesticides. This is welcomed across Monmouthshire and particularly by our fantastic charity based in Monmouth, Bees for Development. Does the Minister agree that where the Conservatives fail, this government will restore nature and biodiversity for future generations?
Yeah.
I do indeed agree, and I do pay tribute to the people who are speaking for the bees in her constituency. We will deliver 30 by 30 on land in England. What that means is we will protect and preserve 30% of our land for nature and long-term conservation and management as part of our contribution to international targets.
Shadow Minister Robbie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we thought it couldn't get any worse, the government roll out their latest attack on our farming community and UK food production, setting the direction that they want to replace food production with around 20% of farmland being dedicated to solar farms, tree planting, biodiversity offsetting and wildlife habitats, all to meet green targets. And the proposed figures are astonishing, with well over 1 million hectares being proposed to be taken out of food production by this government. And the economic analysis, Mr. Speaker, already predicts that well over 12,000 farms will be lost within a generation as a result of this government's policies. So will the Minister acknowledge that hard-working farmers are being caught in the crossfire in this government's dash towards green targets? And does the Minister recognise the fear amongst our farmers that their policies amount not to food security, Mr. Speaker, but food lunacy?
Minister.
Well, this is something, there's a lot of sound and fury, but this is something that they were working on in opposition. It's shades of the DRS, which was essentially his legislation and where the front bench was absent without leave when it came to the vote. On the land use framework, we have published a consultation. It has been welcomed by the National Farmers Union and welcomed by farmers in giving certainty and security, something that was sadly lacking from the previous government.
Darren Paffey.
Question 2, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Can I thank my honourable friend, first of all, for his service on the Water Special Measures Bill Committee. He will know that that bill creates new powers for the regulator, including banning the payment of unjustified bonuses for water bosses whose companies fail environmental standards, and ensuring that imprisonment is a sentencing option where environmental regulators are obstructed, holding water companies and their executives to account. In addition, we are doubling compensation for poor service to hold water companies to account for failure in their service delivery.
Darren Paffey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for his answer. Many of my constituents in Southampton, Itchen, have written outraged at the 53% bill increase that Southern Water are proposing at a time when they and others are continuing to pollute our rivers at an alarming rate. This is simply becoming a national scandal. So as part of the further work of the coming independent water review, will the Secretary of State consider ensuring that water companies get back to delivering reliable services for customers rather than lining the pockets of executives and shareholders?
My honourable friend makes a very important point. Bills, of course, are going up because the previous government did nothing as our sewage infrastructure crumbled and millions of pounds were allowed to be diverted to pay for bonuses and dividends instead of for investment. This government has ring-fenced money earmarked for infrastructure, so this scandal can never happen again.
That's expensive.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Essex Suffolk Water have issued a moratorium on commercial businesses pulling water out of the ground. They say this is due to the Environment Agency. The problem is that water-intensive businesses need water to grow. Asfalls in my constituency has £10 million of investment ready to go to grow their brewery. Without access to water, they cannot make that investment. If this government is serious about going for growth, can the Minister meet with me and find a solution to the moratorium so we can make our way forward?
I'm more than happy to ask my colleague, the Minister for Water, to meet with you. He raises a very important point, and I've asked Sir John Cunliffe to look at how we can better manage this as part of the work that he's leading.
John Gordon.
Question 3, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to group questions 3 and 5 together. The previous government, of course, did nothing as water companies discharged record levels of sewage into our waterways. The Water Special Measures Bill will create new powers, including banning the payment of bonuses for polluting water companies and bringing criminal charges against persistent law breakers. Ofwat has confirmed a record £104 billion of investment to fix our broken water infrastructure and end the Tory sewage scandal once and for all.
Tom Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd thank the Secretary of State for his answer. In my constituency of Harrogate and Knaresborough, the River Nid is overflowing with sewage on a regular basis. When I visited the Killinghall sewage treatment works last year, one of the key things that came to light was the fact that when we look at water companies, they're only just putting in infrastructure to manage the current sewage issue, not future-proofing. So what steps will the Minister take to ensure that we're building future sewage works that will meet the current demand and also future demand?
Well, the amount of money that was announced by Ofwat in the final determination before Christmas will, of course, create record levels of investment, the highest ever in our water system, to do precisely what the honourable gentleman is talking about, dealing with the current problems with sewage, but also putting in place the infrastructure so that we can manage and meet the demands of the future as well.
Ellie Chance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Secretary of State notes, my constituency of North Herefordshire is very badly affected by water pollution, with devastating effects on the local economy. As the Secretary of State also knows, in my constituency it is agricultural pollution that is the main problem, not sewage. And I note that in his answer to my grouped question, he made no mention of that fact, and so I respectfully remind him yet again that the government really needs to tackle agricultural pollution and sewage pollution in a joined-up way. Now, we know the solutions. I apologise, Mr. Speaker, but to get to the point, since the Minister did not answer the first part of the question, I had to raise that. Specifically, in North Herefordshire, we know the solutions require action together: farmers, regulators, environmental organisations. Will the Secretary of State now commit the funding needed to take forward the Y catchment plan? And will he visit North Herefordshire with me?
Got the question, come on.
I thank her for her question. She makes a very important point. Our farming roadmap will, of course, be also looking at how we can reduce runoff from agriculture, which, as she says, is a major source of pollution in our waterways. And we are looking at how we can move to catchment-based models, including in the Y, where there's been a great deal of very important work done already, so that we can tackle more effectively all sources of pollution that are causing such trouble for our waterways.
Zoe Franklin.
Mr. Speaker, question 3.
4.
No problem. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to group questions 4 and 8. The first duty of any government is to protect its citizens. So we're investing a record £2.65 billion over 2 years in building, maintaining and upgrading flood defences, which will protect 66,500 properties across England.
Zoe Franklin.
Thank you. Across my constituency of Guildford, my local flood forums work tirelessly bringing together agencies and residents to address the growing concerns they have around flooding. Will the Minister provide detail on how the government is going to ensure that constituencies like mine, who often lose out because they are semi-rural and urban, get the funding they need to address current flooding issues and mitigate for the growing flooding issues across Guildford in a holistic and sustainable way?
Minister.
I thank you for thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and she's quite right to highlight that under the previous funding formula, rural communities did often miss out on the defences that they desperately need. So we've set out plans to consult on a new formula that's going to be announced fairly shortly, and of course you'll be very welcome to contribute to that.
Joshua Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Minister confirm what portion of the £2.6 billion allocated for flood preparedness will be used in my constituency of Maidenhead, specifically to protect villages of Hurley and Cookham?
Minister.
I think I'm going to get a lot of questions like this today, Mr. Speaker. So we'll be announcing where the 31 projects will be by the end of March. We'll also be looking at where we've had to put money into maintenance and upgrading defences, because of course we were left with flood defences in their worst state on record, complete dereliction of duty by the previous government. So we've had to prioritise maintenance as well as building new defences, but I'm hoping you won't have to wait too long.
Toby Perkins, Chair of the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend and the Secretary of State deserve great credit for attracting the large investment that has come. But once they've finished the lap of honour, they will be aware that this is literally just the first step up the mountain. She's absolutely right that the government has inherited flood defences in an appalling state. The latest estimates are as many as 6 million houses are at risk of flooding. I also call on her to get on with the flood improvements we demand in Chesterfield. But can she tell us more about how she's going to make sure that firstly this money gets spent wisely, and secondly that the Treasury understand that this is not a one-year commitment, but something we're going to need for the rest of this term?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and can I also say, Mr. Speaker, congratulate my honourable friend on his recent engagement. She's absolutely right to point out about the importance of money being spent saves money. I think some couple of interesting facts is for every £1 we spend on maintenance of flood defences actually saves £13 when it comes to that damage prevented. And for building new defences, for every £1 we spend, it's £5 spent in preventing and preventing damage. So these are important statistics that I tend to use frequently with the Treasury in future negotiations and spending reviews.
Julie Mims.
Speaker, to the north of my constituency, along the Scottish border and between that and Hadrian's Wall, lie the debatable lands. But in the centre of Carlisle, there also lie the forgotten lands along the River Coldew, forgotten due to the incompetence of the party opposite that failed to deliver the flood defences along the Coldew that were promised after Carlisle was devastated in 2015 and not delivered. Please, can I ask the Minister to remember the forgotten lands of Carlisle?
I thank my honourable friend, and she makes a persuasive case, Mr. Speaker. In fact, in every orals that we've had so far, my honourable friend makes a persuasive case. And she's right to highlight the fact that not only did the previous government leave our defences in the worst state on record, but they actually failed to spend some of the money allocated as well, something that this government is having to deal with, along with the many other issues we're cleaning up.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Surrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yet another wet winter across Somerset highlights the need for the government to urgently deliver solutions to mitigate the impact of flooding on farmland and protect domestic food production. The Brew Headlands multi-benefit project, facilitated by FWAG South West, is working with farmers and landowners in Bruton, Charlton Musgrove and Wincanton to address flooding issues, and holds workshops which focus on natural flood management to slow the flow of water across the Upper Brew, thus reducing flooding, sediment runoff and associated pollution of watercourses. But despite these efforts, many farmers in the catchment, and indeed the county and the country, are angry at the level of inundation of land that could be prevented by better flood management. So how will the Minister work to support farmers, build flood resilience and protect food security?
Minister.
Thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and she's right to point out how angry farmers are and how they feel they've been let down by the previous government when it comes to flood protection, because the previous formula was only there to allocate based on numbers of property protected and paid little regard due to rural areas. And she's also mentioned one of my favourite things, which is natural flood management, and we had a round table recently on it with the NFU represented and the CLA to talk about how we can better protect our rural areas in a more nature-friendly way.
Peter Bevan.
Question 6, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Under the Animal Welfare Regulations 2018, anyone in the business of breeding and selling cats as pets needs to have a valid licence issued by their local authority, and licensees must meet strict statutory minimum welfare standards which are enforced by local authorities.
Mr Speaker, as a proud cat dad to 2 cats, one of which was beaten to the title of Per Minister by Attlee, the Speaker's cat, it amazed me to find out that the 2018 LAIA regulations on animal breeding focuses merely on dogs and not cat breeding. Could the Minister therefore assure me that he will look at updating these regulations to include cats?
I thank him, and I thank him for his references. I can tell him that the Animal Welfare Committee has provided its opinion on the welfare implications of current and emergent feline breeding practices, and we will be looking at those and coming back with measures in future. But could I also say in passing, pay tribute to organisations like Cats Protection who do such wonderful work, and I'm told have recently pointed my honourable friend on the front bench to her new kittens, Lily and Megatron.
Bill Rabir.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There are 12.5 million cat owners in the UK, and hundreds of thousands of cats are killed on the roads every year. The last government agreed that it would be right to include cats in the Road Traffic Safety Act, but they just simply didn't do it. And this means that cats are regularly hit and just scooped to the side of the road, and there's no legal duty to report that. Does the Minister agree that this is something that we should do to bring cats in parity with dogs in terms of their safety on the road?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for a question, and this is an issue that has been widely discussed. The advice we have is that it would be difficult to actually enforce in practice, but I fully recognise the distress and concern that it causes.
Edward Morrell.
Number 7, please, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and again I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and I can tell him that the Secretary of State set out our vision to boost farmers' profitability and sustainability in our plan for change when he spoke to the 2025 Oxford Farming Conference. That includes a cast-iron commitment to food security, a £5 billion agricultural budget over the next 2 years, boosting profitability by making the supply chain fairer and protecting farmers in trade deals.
Farmers in West Dorset are struggling with rising costs, regulatory burden, market instability, and supermarkets paying unsustainably low prices for what they produce. This forces many farmers to diversify away from food production in order to survive. Given the vital role that farming plays in both our rural economy and in food security, what specific measures will the government introduce to stop the need for diversification and ensure that farming remains a financially viable and attractive industry for the next generation of West Dorset's farmers?
He makes an important set of points, but I would very much point him to the speech that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, made at Oxford, because he made the very strong point that farming needs to get a better return for the hard work that farmers do. But alongside that, diversification is important to allow people to get through the difficult times which inevitably come up in a cyclical business like farming.
Speaker, increasing demand for biofuel feedstocks offers a huge opportunity for agriculture, in particular feedstocks for sustainable aviation fuel. Given the welcome SAF mandate and revenue certainty mechanism, there is a real chance for growth in this area, especially if we support rapid conversion at Grangemouth. Can I ask the Minister what steps he is taking to secure a scalable supply of feedstocks and how he will remove barriers for its use in the production of SAF?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. He makes a very important point, but it's very important to make sure we get the right balance between producing food and using our land for other purposes, which is why it is so important that a land use framework was brought forward. We have a consultation going on for the next 12 weeks, and I'm sure he and others will make contributions to it.
Shadow Minister Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To have growth in agriculture, we need healthy animals, and for that, farms need biosecurity. Crucial to that is the Animal and Plant Health Agency, the APHA, who again deserve our thanks in these challenging times, Mr. Speaker. With the alarming recent foot and mouth outbreak in Germany, avian influenza again surging, blue tongue still with us, and African swine fever at our doorstep, we must act urgently. Please, can the government release the further necessary £1.4 billion to redevelop the APHA HQ in Weybridge, a programme started under the Conservatives with £1.2 billion committed in 2020? Mr. Speaker, for the sake of agriculture, animal health, rural mental health, biosecurity and indeed national security, please, will the Minister act now?
Minister.
The honourable gentleman makes an important set of points around the biosecurity we need to have in place to protect our country. And across this dispatch box over the last few weeks, we've had a series of questions around foot and mouth outbreak in Germany, around avian influenza. We've had this discussion around the investment in Weybridge. I'm delighted that it's this government that's brought forward a £280 million investment in Weybridge. Of course, we do need to do more in future, but what on earth were the previous government doing over the last 14 years?
David Reid.
Question number 9, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The truth is that confidence amongst farmers has been far too low for far too long. That's why this government is setting out a sustainable long-term plan for farming. And again, I would point people to the Secretary of State's address at the Oxford Farming Conference, and we'll continue to progress our priorities over the coming weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Farmers across Devon are rightly concerned about Labour's planned changes to APR and BPR, particularly the serious impact on family farms and sustainability of rural communities. In early December, I wrote to the Secretary of State inviting him to meet with Devon's farming community, an event to be organised in conjunction with Devon's NFU to provide clarity on the policy's objectives and address their concerns. As of yet, I have not received a response. I will ask the Secretary of State directly now, will he come to Devon, meet with local farmers and explain how these policies will not undermine their livelihoods and the future of British farming?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and the question has been asked of me at this dispatch box over the last few weeks many times. I can tell him I've been to meet farmers in Cumbria. Last week I met farmers in South Cambridgeshire. I would love to come and meet farmers in Devon. So I'm very happy to add him to my list of my grand tour around the country to reassure people that there is a strong plan for the future to make sure that farmers have a viable future, which they did not have under the last government.
Can I just say on that point, when ministers do tours, I hope they will make sure the MP is aware, because it didn't happen in my case. Alistair Stratham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 10, please.
Metal recyclers are regulated by local authorities and the Environment Agency, and they must meet specific treatment standards. We are ensuring online marketplaces and vapes producers contribute fairly towards the cost of recycling waste electricals, including metal components, and the sale of disposable vapes will be banned from the 1st of June this year.
Alistair Stratham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For 6 times in the last 12 months, Itchen has had to endure repeated fires at industrial estates, often triggered by lithium-ion batteries. It's clear we need much tougher regulations to ensure the safety of these sites, and also, given the inherent risks their businesses now pose, consideration of whether a time-limited licensing scheme would better enable local authorities to ensure their location remains appropriate with evolving land use. Will the Minister meet with me to ensure we can make progress on this important issue?
Minister.
I'm always happy to meet with my honourable friend. We know battery-related fires risk lives, livelihoods and the environment. The Environment Agency, I know, is currently reviewing approximately 2,000 metal recycling permits. The Itchen shredder site is midway through its review and a revised permit will be issued shortly. They've also produced new regulatory guidance on metal shredding and will be consulting on guidance for waste batteries in the spring.
Mr. Speaker, thank you Minister for that answer. Minister, Northern Ireland were probably fairly fortunate in this case to have a good regulation of metal recycling businesses. Ards and North Down Council, as an example, do that exceptionally well. Other businesses across my borough and indeed in Belfast and further afield across Northern Ireland do the same thing Has the Minister had an opportunity? I know the Minister loves going to Northern Ireland. Has the Minister had an opportunity to speak to the relevant Minister in Northern Ireland Assembly to discuss what we're doing to help you? Thank you.
Minister.
The honourable gentleman knows my affection and origins in the county of Fermanagh, the Lakeland county there. I'd be very happy to talk to Minister Muir to talk about what we can learn in England from the good practice that seems to be happening in Northern Ireland.
Bill Estes.
Question 11, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I would like to take questions 11 and 12 together. And I thank the honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, for his question. And over recent weeks, we've announced a series of reforms delivering on the government's New Deal for farmers, making sure that in line with World Trade Organisation rules and domestic procurement rules, we can make sure that the procurement is used to back British farmers.
Well, that's been withdrawn, so no need to do that. Bill Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Farmers and growers in my constituency want to sell to hospitals and schools, but over the last few years, they found it increasingly difficult, not least because of the procurement chapters in the trade agreements that were concluded by the party opposite. So will my honourable friend confirm that under this government, growers and farmers will be able to sell to public bodies and play their part in making sure that we keep Britain fed?
Minister.
He's absolutely right. There's a real opportunity here, £5 billion worth of purchasing power in the public sector. So we are looking at ways of making sure that's happening. But what was a real surprise to us was to find the previous government hadn't even measured the amount that was being bought. So that's the starting point. We'll start to make that happen, and we will get that huge opportunity for British farmers.
I welcome the government's focus in this area. One of the barriers that my small agricultural businesses face in supplying the public sector is the complexity of the contracting process. The Crown Commercial Service made significant improvements to their portal last year, but can I urge the ministerial team to build on that progress to make it easy, particularly small companies, to provide public sector food, which is what ultimately we all want to see more of.
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful, not just for the right honourable gentleman's question, but also for his interest and attendance at DEFRA questions. We're honoured to have him here, and I'm very happy to look at what he's suggested and work to make sure these proposals work. We know it's complicated within World Trade Organisation rules, but I think there's a real prize to be had here.
Right, we come to topicals. Darren Paffey.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the first role of any government is to protect its citizens. Yesterday, we announced that we are committing a record £2.65 billion to build and maintain around 1,000 flood defences to protect lives, homes and businesses. That is a 26% uplift per annum on what the previous government was spending. We are immediately using £140 million to unblock over 30 projects that are ready for delivery but stalled under the previous government. We are launching a consultation to update the funding formula so we can speed up new schemes and ensure rural and coastal communities are properly included. The previous government left our flood defences in the worst condition ever recorded. This government will put them right.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Levels of E. coli and faecal matter in the River Itchen remain disgustingly high, and I want to commend the work of the Friends of the Itchen Estuary Group on highlighting this issue. Like me, they want to see designated bathing water status to protect the river, so can the Secretary of State please update us on when that application process will open again and what changes we can expect?
Let me start by paying tribute to the Friends of the Itchen Estuary's advocacy on this very important issue. DEFRA ran a consultation on reforms to the Bathing Water Regulations 2013, which closed on the 23rd of December 2024. We are currently analysing the responses and considering how any proposed changes may impact the application and designation process, and we will, of course, respond fully in due course.
Secretary of State Victoria Ratkin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The head of Port Health at Dover warned the Select Committee this week that if funding is not secured within 7 weeks, then food security checks at the border will be stopped. This will mean unchecked and potentially dangerous meat appearing on supermarket shelves and in restaurants at a time when foot and mouth disease is in Germany. When will the Secretary of State protect our borders and confirm this funding?
Well, the NFU and other interested parties have quite rightly raised their concerns about the situation with foot and mouth that was discovered in Germany. We are relieved that there has not been a further spread of that outbreak, but we are taking all appropriate measures at the border to ensure that this country remains safe in terms of biosecurity, and we will continue to monitor the situation and take appropriate action to ensure that there can be no repeat of what happened around 20 years ago when foot and mouth outbreak in this country devastated farming and cost the economy a total of £14 billion.
Victoria Atkins.
Secretary of State, I don't think the Secretary of State either understood my question or knows the answer, because I asked him when will he confirm this funding. Compare this relaxed approach with the Prime Minister's seeming desperation to pay more than the entire DEFRA budget to surrender the Chagos Islands. Now, does the right honourable gentleman really support taxing British farming families for dying, slashing winter fuel payments for rural pensioners, and hiking taxes on rural businesses to pay £9 billion to a foreign government on some dodgy legal advice from Labour lawyers?
Secretary of State.
I have to say, if the Shadow Secretary of State really cared about value for money, she wouldn't have wasted £500 million, £500,000, relocating her office in the Department from Health on a project that was purely about her own personal vanity.
Lorraine Beavers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Fleetwood and Thornton and beyond have suffered from toxic stenches for the last 12 months. Last night was extremely unpleasant, with residents reporting nosebleeds, breathing problems, headaches and vomiting this morning. The stench is because of the mismanagement of the local Jameson Road landfill site. Despite multiple interventions by the Environment Agency, including a 6 weeks closure, the smell is now as bad as ever, if not worse.
Get to the question.
What can the government do to ensure the Environment Agency have much stronger powers to deal with landfill sites that bring daily misery to the residents, like those living in my constituency of Blackpool North and Fleetwood?
Minister.
My heart goes out to her constituents who are clearly suffering terrible public health consequences from the stink at the site. There is an ongoing investigation into the cause of odour issues that have impacted the community in Fleetwood, and it escalated in January 24. The Environment Agency have told me they expect odour issues to reduce within the next 7 days. Should this not occur, they will consider any and all appropriate regulatory intervention to reduce the impact on the community. And they've also launched...
We've only got 4 minutes. Madeira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The area around Heathrow has breached nitrogen dioxide legal limits for years now. So what assessment has the Environment Secretary made of the impact on air quality of both the additional flights and the additional vehicles travelling to and from Heathrow as a result of a third runway?
I thank the Honourable Lady for an important question. The Government is developing a series of interventions to reduce emissions so that everybody's exposure to air pollution is reduced. And we're also conducting a comprehensive review of how we communicate air quality information to ensure that members of the public and vulnerable groups have the information they need to protect themselves and understand their impact on air quality. And of course, no further decisions regarding other developments have been made.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Too many communities, including in Huddersfield, are forced to deal with persistent fly tipping and littering in their streets and neighbourhoods, and residents are understandably fed up with it. So what support is the government providing to local areas to ensure they have the resources they need to prevent and tackle persistent fly tipping?
I visited a fly tipping site in Lichfield where people have been trapped in their homes. So we know this blights communities, harms wildlife, places huge costs on taxpayers and businesses. Councils have been dealing with over 1 million incidents in 22-23, up 10% more than 3 years ago. I have asked the officials to look at the waste carriers, brokers and dealers regime because I believe it is not fit for purpose. I've asked officials to look at how we strengthen it to crack down on waste criminals.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I refer to my register of interests. Thoroughbred horses are high health, high welfare animals that should be treated as such to allow cross-border travel without physical border checks. Can the Minister commit today to recognising high health status, put welfare first and reduce this barrier to trade?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My near neighbour raises an important point. This is a very high-value sector. A commitment was made to designating thoroughbred horses as high-health animals as part of the border target operating model, and we will provide an update on the timeline for implementation by the end of the summer.
Muraz Mithendale, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents in Hale have become increasingly concerned about the dredging of sand around Hale Harbour and the potential environmental damage. We desperately need a solution that works for the residents, the environment and maintains our vitally important harbour. Would the Minister meet with me as a matter of urgency to discuss how the Government and the Environment Agency will support all local stakeholders to establish a long-term sand management and erosion plan in Hale?
Minister.
I thank my noble friend for raising this important issue and for the work he's doing championing what is obviously a crucial issue for his residents, and of course I'll be happy to meet with him.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Constituents of Witney were extremely distressed to receive letters this week from Thames Water saying that their bills are going up by £19 a month from April, putting more pressure on household bills. Does the Minister think this is acceptable, given that the restructuring plan in the High Court is putting 800 to 900 million of interest expenses onto this company?
Order. It's sub judice because you're going into the actual detail of the planning application that's under the courts at the moment. Can the Minister say anything? If not, I think we'll have to move on. Right, Lee Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over a decade ago, planning permission was given to build an incinerator on the outskirts of Croydon. That location now has thousands of houses, a school, a nursery, and frankly, it's now in the heart of the community and no longer on the outskirts. Given that the incinerator is yet to be built, does the Minister agree with me that in light of the crackdown on waste incinerators, that the planning application should now be re-looked at and the incinerator moved?
Mr. Speaker, it's not appropriate for me to comment on a specific planning permission, but I do encourage those developing energy from waste facilities, including those that have already got permission, to consider the evidence DEFRA has published over the recess, the new standards we've introduced, and the government's circular economy opportunities when determining if their facility is still required.
Through the Select Committee, Alistair Carmichael.
Can I take the Secretary of State back to the subject of illegal meat imports? The Select Committee on Tuesday was told that at Dover this work, which covers only 20% of arrivals, is being done in live lanes, despite the fact there is a border control post at Dover which is sitting unused, and that the funding for Dover Port Health Authority is due to expire at the end of March. At the very least, can we sort out the financing for this in the next financial year?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Chair of the Select Committee for his question. The issues at Dover are significant. They've been long-running. The funding was not resolved ahead of the general election. There's an ongoing discussion, and we are very aware of the challenges that are faced. We are on it, and we will make sure that we are talking to the Dover Port Health Authority.
Jacob Collier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rural communities like Marchington, Draycott and Ralston have been suffering with flooding for many years, with funding often going to areas with larger populations. Can the Minister set out what steps she is taking to ensure that rural communities aren't left out from flood protection funding?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and again he's right to highlight how the previous flooding formula did discriminate against rural communities because it was based purely on properties protected and not on creating the right solution in the right area, and that's exactly why we wish to reform the formula, and we'll be announcing a consultation very shortly.
Jeremy Hunt.
Given that the OBR refused to endorse the 22 billion black hole figure, in fact they refused to say there was any black hole at all, will the Secretary of State tell the House what possible justification there can be for the removal of agricultural property relief, which will do untold damage to the growth prospects of family farms in my business and across the country?
The right honourable member is fully aware of the appalling state the public finances were left in at the end of this government. This government has had to take very difficult decisions to balance the finances so we can get growth that will benefit the entire economy, including the farming sector that was on its knees after 14 years of Conservative rule.
Right, that completes questions. Let the front benches change over.